A struggling single-dad chef fed a crying stranger's baby with his last ingredients, completely unaware that his simple recipe would leave her reclusive billionaire mother in tears and change his life forever. The rent is due on the 1st, Leo, not whenever you find a spare coin in the street. The rain hammered down on the glass roof of the bus stop like 1,000 desperate fists, relentless and wild, each drop a tiny, cold accusation. Leo clutched the threadbare strap of his backpack, the worn fabric a familiar, comfortless weight against his shoulder, as he stared into the swirling gray puddles that mirrored the chaos in his own heart. He was soaked to the bone, a deep, biting cold seeping past his thin jacket and into his very marrow, a physical manifestation of the despair that had become his constant companion. He was late again. The words of his landlord, Mr. Henderson, echoed in the sterile silence of his mind, sharp and cruel as broken glass. They had been delivered that morning on his doorstep, a sneer twisting the man's thin lips as he gestured vaguely at the peeling paint of the apartment door, at the faint smell of boiled potatoes that clung to the hallway. Leo had simply nodded, his gaze steady and quiet, offering no excuses. For what excuse could possibly matter? His son, Oliver, had been awake all night with a hollow, rattling cough that seemed to splinter the very air in their small two-room flat. The boy's pale face, usually so full of innocent light, had been drawn and weary, his small hand clutching Leo's with a fragile strength that broke his father's heart into a million pieces. The frantic, late-night trip to the emergency clinic had drained the last of his meager savings. The crisp bills handed over for a simple bottle of cough syrup feeling like a pound of his own flesh. The rent money was gone. It had vanished into the sterile, uncaring bureaucracy of healthcare. And now he was left with nothing but the landlord's threat and the heavy, unbearable weight of his own failure. He winced. He had once been a chef of some renown, a man whose hands could coax magic from simple ingredients, whose palate was a finely tuned instrument. He'd worked in gleaming kitchens with polished marble countertops and the soft hush of professional reverence. He remembered the weight of a perfectly balanced chef's knife, the hiss of olive oil in a hot pan, the creation of something beautiful from chaos. That life felt like a dream belonging to another man, a ghost who wore his face. That life had died with Clara. She had been the golden glow in his world, the steady beat of his heart, her laughter the music that filled their home. When she was taken from them, so suddenly, so cruelly, the light had gone out, leaving only the profound, cavernous emptiness of grief. He had lost his prestigious job shortly after, his focus shattered, his spirit brittle. Now, he flipped greasy burgers and slopped chili into bowls at the Greasy Spoon, a diner where the light was always a flickering, sickly yellow and the air smelled of stale coffee and regret. The work was honest, but it was a constant, grinding reminder of how far he had fallen. His hands, once celebrated for their artistry, were now perpetually calloused and raw from scalding dishwater. He was just a man, a desperate, weary man. The bus finally arrived with a hydraulic sigh, its brakes squealing in protest against the wet asphalt. He climbed aboard, the warmth inside a momentary reprieve, and found a seat by a window streaked with rain. The city blurred past, a watercolor of weeping lights and hurried, faceless figures under dark umbrellas. Each face seemed to tell a story of its own hardship, yet his own felt so uniquely unbearable. He thought of Oliver, left in the care of their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose kindness was a small, flickering candle in his vast darkness. He had promised his son a special dinner, a little bit of magic from the kitchen to make up for the fear of the previous night. It was a promise he didn't know how he could keep. He checked his wallet. 2 crumpled dollar bills and a handful of coins. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. His chest tightened with a familiar, searing pain. He was failing his son. The one pure, innocent thing left in his shattered world. The one person he had sworn to protect. He was failing. He arrived at the diner 10 minutes late, earning a sharp, venomous glare from his boss, Mr. Finch, a man whose soul seemed to be as greasy as the food he served. Finch was the personification of impatience, a petty tyrant who ruled his small, stained kingdom with an iron fist and a perpetually curled lip. "Nice of you to join us, Rossi," Finch sneered, his voice a low grumble. "The lunch rush doesn't wait for tragic heroes." Leo didn't respond. He simply tied the strings of his stained apron, his movements quiet and dignified, and took his place behind the grill. The heat was oppressive, the sounds a chaotic symphony of clattering plates, sizzling fat, and the gruff shouts of his boss. He moved on autopilot, his body remembering the rhythm of the work while his mind drifted back to Oliver's small, trusting face. He had to find a way. He had to make things right. But the walls were closing in, the path forward obscured by a heavy fog of debt and exhaustion. He felt a profound loneliness, a sense of being utterly adrift in a cold, indifferent sea. The relentless hammering of the rain outside seemed to echo the pounding of his own weary heart. It was a sound that promised no end. Total silence. The afternoon bled into a miserable, damp evening, the flow of customers dwindling to a trickle of solitary figures seeking refuge from the storm. The diner was cast in an amber hue from the streetlights outside, the rain-slicked windows distorting the world into a shimmering, lonely landscape. Leo was wiping down the stainless steel counter, his movements methodical, his thoughts a tangled mess of unpaid bills and his son's persistent cough, when the bell above the door chimed softly. The sound was different from the usual harsh jangle, a gentle note in the otherwise dreary atmosphere. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this soft click of a door opening to the storm, would change everything. A woman stood there, hesitating in the doorway, a small bundle clutched tightly to her chest. She was drenched, her dark hair plastered to her pale face, her clothes simple and worn, looking as if they had been chosen for comfort rather than style. But it was her eyes that held him. They were haunted, hollow with a weariness that went far beyond physical exhaustion. It was a soul-deep fatigue he recognized instantly, for he saw it in his own reflection every morning. She moved to a small booth in the corner, her steps faltering slightly, and gently placed the bundle on the seat beside her. It was a baby, wrapped in a simple, threadbare blanket, and the baby was crying. It wasn't a demanding cry for food or attention. It was a raw, desperate wail of pure misery, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the quiet diner. The woman tried to soothe the infant, her hands trembling as she rocked her, her voice a low, cracked whisper. "Shoo, Lily, please shoo. Mommy's here." But the cries only intensified, growing shriller, more frantic. A few of the remaining patrons shot irritated glances in her direction. Mr. Finch emerged from the back office, his face a thundercloud of annoyance. "Ma'am," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth, "if you can't control your child, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing my customers." The woman flinched as if struck. Her head bowed, a wave of shame washing over her pale features. She looked at her screaming child, then back at Finch, her eyes glistening with unspoken tears of frustration and helplessness. She looked utterly defeated. Something inside Leo splintered. He saw not just a stranger, but a reflection of his own desperation. He saw the crushing weight of parenthood when you are alone, the terror of not being able to provide the one thing your child needs most: comfort. He saw the public humiliation, the judgment from a world that had no idea of the silent battles being fought. Before he could think, before he could consider the consequences or the wrath of his boss, he was moving. He untied his apron and walked over to the booth, his steps quiet but firm. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle. The woman looked up, startled, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and surprise. She expected another complaint, another dismissal. "My name is Leo," he continued, ignoring Finch's murderous glare. "I was a chef. My son, he used to cry like that when he was teething. Sometimes, a little food, something soft and warm, can help." He hesitated, a flicker of his own insecurity showing. "If you'll allow me, I could try to make something for her. Something simple." The woman, whose name he would later learn was Serafina, just stared at him, her lips parted in disbelief. She was so accustomed to being invisible, to shouldering her grief and her new, terrifying responsibilities in a sterile silence, that this unsolicited act of kindness felt seismic. She could only nod, a single, jerky movement. Leo gave her a small, reassuring smile and turned back to the kitchen. Finch was there, blocking his path, his arms crossed over his portly chest. "And who's paying for this, Rossi? Are you running a charity now?" Finch hissed, his voice low and menacing. Leo met his gaze, his own eyes unwavering. "I am," he said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the 2 crumpled dollar bills. His last $2 in the world, the money he had been saving for a loaf of bread and a carton of milk for Oliver's breakfast. He placed them on the counter. This should cover the cost of a carrot and a potato without waiting for a response. He pushed past his furious boss and entered the kitchen. He worked with a speed and grace that belonged to his former life. He found a single, vibrant carrot and a small, perfect potato from the pantry. He peeled them with deft, sure movements of his paring knife, the familiar action a small comfort. He diced them into tiny, uniform pieces and placed them in a small saucepan with a splash of purified water. He let them simmer, his focus absolute, the chaos of the diner fading away into a soft hush. As the vegetables softened, he mashed them with a fork, again and again, until they formed a smooth, vibrant orange puree. It was a simple recipe, something born of instinct and memory, a dish he had made for Oliver 100 times. He added a single, tiny drop of olive oil for richness and a pinch of salt so small it was almost symbolic. He tasted it. It was clean, sweet, and warm. It was perfect. He scooped the puree into a small, clean bowl and took a tiny spoon from the cutlery drawer. This was more than just food. It was an offering. It was a piece of his heart, a prayer for a stranger's peace. He carried the bowl out to the booth, the warmth of it seeping into his hands. Serafina watched him approach, her expression a mixture of awe and trepidation. The baby, Lily, was still crying, her little body rigid with distress. Leo sat down opposite them, placing the bowl on the table. "It's just carrot and potato," he said quietly. "It's warm, not hot. Would you like to try?" Serafina nodded again, unable to speak. She took the small spoon from him, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting moment. She dipped the spoon into the bright orange puree and brought it to her baby's lips. For a second, Lily turned her head away, her cries unabated. But then the scent seemed to reach her. Her cries faltered. She turned back, her tiny mouth opening tentatively. Serafina gently placed the spoon inside. A moment of stunned silence. Lily's crying stopped. Her eyes, red and swollen, blinked slowly. She swallowed. Then her mouth opened again, this time wider, waiting. Serafina gave her another spoonful and another. The baby ate with a quiet, focused intensity, her whole body relaxing, the tension melting away from her tiny limbs. After a few more spoonfuls, her eyelids began to droop. Her breathing deepened into a soft, rhythmic sigh. Within minutes, she was fast asleep, her head nestled against her mother's shoulder, a faint orange smudge at the corner of her mouth. The relentless wailing was replaced by a profound, sacred silence. Serafina looked up at Leo, and for the first time, he saw the raw, unbearable grief she was hiding behind her exhaustion. Her eyes, a deep, stormy gray, glistened with unshed tears. These were not tears of frustration, but of something far more profound. They were tears of cathartic relief, of gratitude so immense it had no words. A single tear traced a path down her pale cheek. She looked from her sleeping child to the man sitting opposite her. This quiet, gentle stranger who had shown her more compassion in 5 minutes than she had felt in months. He had performed a small miracle. In that moment, he hadn't just fed her baby. He had fed her shattered soul. He had reminded her that goodness still existed in a world that had become cold and transactional. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. The words felt utterly inadequate, a tiny coin offered for a priceless treasure. He simply nodded, a soft, understanding smile touching his lips. "Every parent needs a little help sometimes," he said. He stood up to leave, to give her space, but she reached out, her hand gently touching his arm. "Wait," she said. "What is your name?" "Leo," he repeated. Leo Rossi. She committed the name to memory, etching it into her mind. "Thank you, Leo," she said again, her voice filled with a sincere, unwavering intensity. He left her then, retreating to the clatter and grease of the kitchen, leaving the two of them in their small bubble of peace. She stayed for another hour, just watching her baby sleep, the simple bowl of puree sitting on the table like a holy relic. Before she left, she scribbled a hasty message on a crumpled napkin, a simple, heartfelt note of thanks, and tucked it under the empty bowl. As she stepped back out into the pounding rain, clutching her sleeping daughter, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt since her husband's death. It was a fragile, tender thing. It was hope. Leo found the note after she was gone. "You saved us both tonight. I will never forget this." It read. There was no name, no number, just the words. He folded the small piece of paper carefully and put it in his pocket, next to the small, worn photo of Clara and a baby Oliver. It was a small, intangible treasure, but it felt more valuable than any money. The warmth of the moment, however, was short-lived. Mr. Finch cornered him as he was cleaning the grill for the night. The man's face was contorted with a petty rage, his small eyes gleaming with malice. "That little stunt of yours," he spat, jabbing a finger into Leo's chest. "That little act of charity with my ingredients and on my time is coming out of your pay." He named a figure that was nearly a quarter of Leo's weekly earnings. Leo's heart sank. It was a devastating blow, pushing him even further into the depths of his financial despair. The brief moment of human connection, the feeling of having done something right and good, was now tainted by the cruel reality of his situation. He had performed a selfless act, and his punishment was swift and severe. He said nothing, simply absorbing the injustice with his usual quiet dignity. He finished his shift in a heavy silence, the earlier warmth replaced by the biting cold of anxiety. He walked home through the now drizzling rain, the city's lights smearing across the wet pavement. The world felt hostile and unforgiving. He had tried to be a good person, and it had only made his desperate situation worse. He let himself into his apartment building, the scent of damp and dust a familiar assault on his senses. He quietly opened his apartment door. The small living room was cast in the soft glow of a single flickering lamp. Mrs. Gable was asleep in the armchair, a book resting on her lap. In the other room, he could hear the soft, steady breathing of his son. The rattling cough was gone. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. He gently woke Mrs. Gable, thanking her profusely and insisting she take the last of his coffee for her morning. After she left, he went into Oliver's room. His son was sleeping peacefully, his face calm and innocent in the dim light, his favorite worn teddy bear tucked under his arm. Leo stood there for a long time, just watching him breathe. This was his world. This was his reason. The landlord, the job, the lack of money. It all faded in the face of this profound, unconditional love. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to Oliver's forehead. "I'll fix this, buddy," he whispered into the quiet dark. "I promise." But as he retreated to the lumpy sofa that served as his bed, the weight of that promise felt heavier than ever. He lay awake for hours, the crumpled note in his pocket a stark reminder of the night's strange, bittersweet encounter, while the city outside finally, mercifully, fell silent. Meanwhile, across the city, in a place so far removed from Leo's world it might as well have been another planet, Serafina arrived home. Her car, a sleek, unassuming sedan she drove herself to maintain a sliver of anonymity, passed through imposing iron gates and swept up a long, winding driveway. The house was not a house. It was a stately, modern mansion of glass and stone, a cavernous monument to wealth and success. It was also a monument to grief. The sterile silence inside was broken only by the soft click of her shoes on the polished marble floors. A nanny, a kind woman with a starched white uniform, rushed forward to take the sleeping Lily, her expression a mixture of relief and professional concern. "Is she all right, Miss Vance?" the nanny asked. She is now, Serafina replied, her voice distant. She was Serafina Vance, CEO of Vance Industries, a global tech empire she had built with her late husband, Julian. She was a commanding figure in boardrooms, a ruthless negotiator, a woman of impeccable taste and unimaginable power. But here, in the hollow, ornate rooms of her home, she was just a widow, a fragile, haunted woman who had lost the love of her life and now felt utterly adrift with their infant daughter. She walked through the cavernous living room, past priceless works of art and furniture that was more sculpture than seating, and stopped in front of a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the glittering, rain-washed city. The city that held the diner that held Leo. She replayed the scene in her mind. The greasy smell, the flickering lights, the hostile glare of the owner, and then the quiet, steady presence of the chef. His gentle eyes, the way he had moved with such purpose and care, creating a masterpiece from nothing. He had asked for nothing in return. He had used his own last $2 to feed her child. In her world, every action was transactional. Every kindness had a motive, every favor an expected return. People fawned over her, not for who she was, but for what she could give them. Leo's selfless act was so pure, so utterly untainted by self-interest, that it had struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was the kind of thing Julian would have done. Julian had always believed in the small, quiet acts of goodness. He had been the heart of their partnership, the one who reminded her of the humanity beyond the balance sheets. Since his death, her heart had felt frozen, encased in a thick layer of ice. Tonight, Leo's kindness had created a crack. A single, hot tear slid down her cheek, followed by another, and then a sob caught in her throat, raw and painful. She hadn't truly cried since the funeral, holding her grief in a tight, controlled clench. But now, in the safety of her empty, silent home, the dam broke. The tears were for Julian, for the unbearable loneliness, for the terror of raising their daughter alone. But they were also tears of a strange, cathartic gratitude for the stranger in the diner. He had shown her a light in the darkness, and she found herself clinging to it desperately. She couldn't let it go. She would not let that act of pure kindness go unrewarded in a world that so often punished it. Her grief gave way to a new, unfamiliar feeling, a sense of renewed purpose. Her mind, so adept at strategy and execution, began to work. She went to her office, a sleek, minimalist space with a desk that seemed to float in the center of the room. She pressed a button on her intercom. "Arthur," she said, her voice still thick with emotion but now laced with a steely resolve. "I need you to find someone for me." Her assistant, Arthur, a man who had been with her for years and was fiercely loyal, responded immediately. "Of course, Ms. Vance. Who are we looking for?" She described Leo, the diner, the approximate time. She left out the personal details of the encounter, framing it as a simple matter of wanting to repay a kindness. "Find out everything you can about him," she commanded. "His name is Leo Rossi. I want to know his situation, his history, everything. But you must be discreet. He cannot know he is being investigated. Am I clear?" "Perfectly, Ms. Vance," Arthur's voice replied, calm and efficient. He knew better than to ask questions. After the call, Serafina sat in the dark, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. She had the power to change lives with the stroke of a pen, to move markets with a single phone call. For the first time in a long time, she felt a desire to use that power not for business, but for something more. For a man who had made her baby a simple bowl of puree. She was going to save him. He just didn't know it yet. The next few days were a blur of quiet desperation for Leo. Mr. Finch seemed to take a sadistic pleasure in making his life miserable, assigning him the worst tasks, making snide comments about his performance, and watching him like a hawk. The docked pay had set off a catastrophic chain reaction. He had to plead with the pharmacist to give him a few days' grace on a refill of Oliver's medication. He ate nothing but dry toast and watered-down soup so that his son could have the last of the milk and eggs. He was walking a tightrope over a chasm of failure, and the rope was fraying with every step. Then, one afternoon, a miracle arrived in a plain white envelope. It was slipped under his apartment door. He opened it with trembling hands, expecting another eviction notice. Instead, it was a letter from a local charitable foundation he had never heard of. It stated that an anonymous benefactor had made a significant donation to their family support fund, and that his overdue rent, as well as his outstanding balance at the clinic, had been paid in full. It also included a grocery store gift card with a balance so high it made him gasp. He sank onto his sofa, the letter shaking in his hand. Disbelief warred with a tidal wave of relief. He read it again and again, the words shimmering through the tears that filled his eyes. Who? Why? It made no sense. He hadn't applied for any aid. He hadn't told anyone the full extent of his troubles. It felt like a divine intervention, a reprieve from a sentence he was sure he was about to receive. He thought back to the woman in the diner, the sad, haunted eyes, the crumpled note. Could it be her? He dismissed the thought almost immediately. She had looked as worn and threadbare as he felt. She was a ghost, a brief, passing moment of connection in his lonely life. This had to be a mistake, a clerical error that had worked in his favor. But the relief was too real, too profound to question too deeply. That night, for the first time in months, he cooked a real meal. He bought a small chicken, fresh vegetables, and the good pasta Oliver loved. The small apartment was filled with the warm, savory aromas of roasting garlic and herbs. Oliver, his cough now completely gone, chattered happily, his cheeks rosy and full again. As Leo watched his son devour his dinner with gusto, a small, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in the barren soil of his heart. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. He was safe, for now. Serafina received Arthur's report in a crisp, leather-bound folder. Contained everything. Leo's celebrated career, the glowing reviews, the sudden downturn after his wife's tragic death. It detailed his current humiliating employment, his financial struggles, his son's recent illness. It painted a picture of a good, dignified man battered by fate, a man of immense talent and integrity trapped in a desperate circumstance. Every word of the report solidified her resolve. The anonymous payment of his debts had been a simple, immediate solution, a way to stanch the bleeding. But it wasn't enough. It was a temporary fix for a systemic problem. The problem was Mr. Finch. The problem was a world that could allow a man like Leo to fall so far. She found herself thinking about him constantly. The quiet strength in his eyes, the gentleness of his hands. She felt an undeniable pull, a need to see him again, not as a powerful benefactor, but as the woman he had helped. She dressed down again in simple jeans and a sweater, and drove herself to the diner a week later. This time there was no rain, no crying baby. She left Lily with the nanny, her heart pounding with a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She slipped into the same corner booth, her hands clenched in her lap. The diner was busier this time, the lunchtime rush in full swing. She saw him behind the counter, a blur of motion, his expression focused and grim. He hadn't seen her. She ordered a cup of coffee from a harried waitress and simply watched him. She saw the way Mr. Finch spoke to him, the casual cruelty, the dismissive gestures. She saw the way Leo absorbed it all without a word, his posture stoic, his face a mask of weary resignation. It made her blood boil. After the rush subsided, he was wiping down a section of the counter near her booth. He finally looked up, and his eyes met hers. A flicker of recognition. He froze. A slow, hesitant smile touched his lips. "Hello again," he said, his voice quiet. "Your baby. Is she all right?" "She's wonderful," Serafina replied, her own smile feeling more natural than it had in months. "Thanks to you," she held his gaze. "I never got to properly thank you, or pay you for the food." "There's no need," he said quickly. "I was glad I could help." An awkward but comfortable silence fell between them. It was broken by Finch's grating voice from across the room. "Rossi, stop chatting up the customers and get back to scrubbing those floors." Leo's smile vanished. A faint flush of embarrassment colored his cheeks. He gave her an apologetic look. I have to. It was good to see you. He turned to leave, but Serafina spoke, her voice clear and steady. Actually, I was hoping to speak with him for a moment. I believe he's on his break. Her tone was polite, but it held an unspoken, commanding quality that made Finch pause. He grumbled something under his breath and retreated to his office. Leo looked at her, surprised. Thank you, he murmured. He's difficult. I can see that, she said, her voice tight with anger she was trying to conceal. Please, sit with me for a minute. Let me buy you a coffee. He hesitated for a moment, then slid into the booth opposite her. Up close, she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the lines of exhaustion etched around his mouth. But his eyes were kind and steady. They talked for nearly an hour. It started with small things, the weather, the city. But soon, the conversation deepened. He spoke of his passion for cooking, not the fancy, elaborate cuisine of his past, but the simple, honest food that nourished the soul. He described his dream of one day opening a small, cozy restaurant, a place where families could feel welcome, where the food was made with love. As he spoke, the weariness fell away from him, replaced by a quiet, passionate glow. He was no longer just a line cook. He was an artist, a dreamer. Then, tentatively, he spoke of Clara. He described her smile, her laugh, the way she had believed in him more than he believed in himself. He didn't cry, but his voice was thick with an unspoken, raw grief that Serafina understood completely. It was a sacred wound, one that never truly healed. She found herself listening with an unwavering focus, feeling as though she was the first person he had truly opened up to in a long time. She felt seen, and in turn, she wanted him to feel seen. When he finished, she didn't offer empty platitudes or condolences. Instead, she simply nodded. My husband, Julian, she began, her own voice dropping to a near whisper. He died just before Lily was born. He never got to hold her. She told him about Julian's brilliance, his kindness, his unwavering optimism. She spoke of the profound, crushing loneliness that had consumed her, the feeling of being a ghost in her own life. They were two strangers in a greasy spoon diner, forging a bond over the shared, hollow space of loss. They were connected by grief. By the time he had to return to work, the atmosphere between them had shifted. They were no longer just a helper and the helped. They were two souls who had recognized the same cracks in each other. As she left the diner that day, Serafina knew her plan had changed. It was no longer just about repaying a debt. It was about him. It was about Leo. The climax came a week later. Leo arrived at work to find Mr. Finch in a particularly foul mood. A health inspector had paid a surprise visit and found several minor violations, all due to Finch's own corner-cutting and negligence. Finch, needing a scapegoat, had decided Leo was the perfect target. He waited until the diner was full, the lunchtime crowd a captive audience. Then he stormed out of his office, waving a piece of paper. Rossi, he bellowed, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent room. You're fired. Leo froze, the spatula he was holding clattering onto the grill. Every head in the diner turned to stare. What? Why? Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. Incompetence. Negligence. Finch shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. He was enjoying the theater of it, the public humiliation. I should have known better than to hire some washed-up has-been. A man who can't even pay his own rent without charity handouts. He was holding the letter from the foundation, which had been accidentally delivered to the diner's mailbox. He waved it in the air for everyone to see. Look at him, taking charity because he can't provide for his own kid. You're a failure, Rossi. Pathetic failure. Now get your things and get out of my sight. You do not belong here. The cruelty of the attack was breathtaking. Leo stood there, stunned into silence, the collective stares of the patrons feeling like physical blows. He felt stripped bare, his private struggles laid out for public consumption and ridicule. He didn't defend himself. He didn't fight back. He simply absorbed the venom, his face pale, his dignity the only shield he had left. He slowly began to untie his stained apron, his hands trembling slightly. He was defeated, utterly and completely shattered. He was about to turn and walk away, to disappear into the shame of it all, when the diner door opened with a soft click. The sound cut through the tense silence. Serafina Vance stood in the doorway. But it was not the disguised, weary woman from before. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored, crisp navy blue suit that spoke of quiet, commanding power. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup subtle but flawless. She radiated an aura of wealth and authority that was so potent it seemed to suck the very air from the room. She was no longer a victim of the storm. She was the storm. She walked calmly into the center of the room, her sleek leather heels making no sound on the grimy linoleum floor. Her gaze was fixed on Mr. Finch, and it was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Finch, flustered by this sudden, powerful presence, faltered. Can I help you, ma'am?" he stammered. "I certainly hope so," Serafina said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the diner. She turned her gaze from Finch to Leo, and for a moment, all the coldness vanished, replaced by a look of unwavering support and profound tenderness. Then she looked back at Finch. "My name is Serafina Vance," she said, the name dropping into the silence like a stone into a still pond. There was a collective gasp from the patrons. Even Finch recognized the name. Vance Industries was a household name, a corporate titan. His jaw went slack. "You have just publicly humiliated a man whose integrity and talent are worth more than this entire block," she continued, her voice rising with a controlled, righteous anger. "You call him a failure? This man showed more humanity in 5 minutes with a bowl of carrots than you have likely shown in your entire miserable life." She took a step closer, and Finch instinctively took a step back. "You see, I was the recipient of his charity. My daughter was sick and crying, and I was at my breaking point. And this man, this pathetic failure, used his last $2 to feed her. He asked for nothing. He expected nothing. He did it because he is a good man." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "And as for the charity he received, that was also from me. A small, anonymous token of my gratitude. A gratitude, it seems, you are incapable of understanding." She then delivered the final, devastating blow. She pulled a sleek phone from her pocket and made a quick call. "Arthur," she said, her voice calm but powerful, "please proceed with the purchase of the property at 114 Elm Street. Yes, the entire building. And inform the current business owner, a Mr. Finch, that his lease is terminated. Effective immediately." She hung up. Total silence. Finch's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. He looked as if he might be sick. You can't do that," he whimpered. "I just did," Serafina said, her voice devoid of any emotion. She turned to the stunned patrons. "Lunch is on me today, for everyone, as an apology for the unfortunate scene you were all forced to witness." Then, she walked over to Leo, who was still standing frozen by the grill, his face a mask of utter disbelief. She gently took his hand. Her touch was warm and steady. "Leo," she said softly, her eyes sincere, "I believe you had a dream of opening your own restaurant. How would you like to build it here?" The world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the diner, the smell of grease, the shocked faces of the crowd. It all faded into a distant hum. All Leo could see were her eyes, filled with a belief in him that he had thought was lost forever. All he could feel was the warmth of her hand, a lifeline in the churning sea of his confusion. He couldn't speak. He could only nod, a single, slow movement. The power dynamic had not just been reversed. It had been utterly annihilated. The cruel, petty tyrant had been rendered powerless, and the virtuous sufferer was being offered salvation on a scale he could never have imagined. Serafina smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "Good," she said. "Let's get to work." She led him out of the diner, past the speechless Mr. Finch, and into the clean, bright light of the afternoon, leaving the ruins of his old life behind them. In the quiet, luxurious interior of her car, the chaos of the diner felt a world away. Leo sat in the plush leather passenger seat, staring out the window, his mind struggling to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. He was jobless, yet he had just been offered his dream. He had been publicly shamed, then heroically defended by one of the most powerful women in the city. Felt like a fever dream. Serafina drove in a comfortable silence for a while, letting him gather his thoughts. Finally, he turned to her, his voice thick with emotion. "Why?" he asked, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. "Why would you do all of this for me?" She pulled the car over to the side of a quiet, tree-lined street and turned to face him. Her expression was open, vulnerable. "Because, Leo," she began, her voice soft but steady, "when my husband died, the world went gray. Everything became about transactions, about profits and losses. I was just existing. My heart was frozen. And then I walked into your diner, a complete mess, and you saw me. You didn't see a potential customer. You saw a person in pain. And you helped, at a cost to yourself." She reached over and gently touched his arm, her eyes glistening. "That simple bowl of food you made for Lily, it was the first warmth I had felt in months. It was more than just food. It was kindness. Pure, unconditional kindness. You reminded me of what my husband always knew. That goodness is real, that it matters. You cracked the ice around my heart, Leo. You woke me up." A tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "Saving you from that horrible man, giving you this opportunity, it isn't charity. It's the most selfish thing I've done in a long time, because helping you makes me feel alive again. It gives me a purpose beyond just making money. You gave me hope. I want to give you a future." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw past the billionaire CEO. He saw the grieving widow, the lonely woman, the new mother. He saw the same pain and the same hope that resided in his own heart. In that moment, an unspoken truth passed between them, an undeniable connection forged in shared loss and unexpected grace. He reached out and gently wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Serafina," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I think you saved me too." In the quiet intimacy of the car, with the afternoon sun filtering through the trees, a new story began. It was no longer just about a savior and the saved. It was about two broken people finding a way to heal each other. It was the beginning of love. 1 year later, the golden glow of the setting sun streamed through the large front window of the restaurant, illuminating the warm, inviting space within. The greasy spoon was gone, replaced by a beautiful, elegant yet cozy eatery called Lily's Spoon. The air smelled not of grease, but of fresh bread, simmering herbs, and roasting chicken. The sound was not of clattering plates, but of soft music, happy chatter, and the gentle clinking of wine glasses. At the center of it all was Chef Leo Rossi, moving through his gleaming, state-of-the-art kitchen with a calm, confident grace. He was no longer the haunted, weary man from the diner. He was vibrant, his eyes shining with purpose and joy. His restaurant was the talk of the town, celebrated for its simple, soulful food made with love. In a corner booth, the same booth where they had first met, sat Serafina Vance. She was watching Leo, a soft, loving smile on her face. In her arms, a healthy, giggling Lily was playing with a small wooden rattle. Across from her, a bright-eyed, happy Oliver was carefully drawing a picture on a napkin. They were a family. After months of rebuilding the restaurant and, in the process, rebuilding their lives, their bond had deepened into a profound, unwavering love. They had found in each other not just a partner, but a home for their weary hearts. Leo brought a small bowl to the table, filled with a vibrant, sweet puree. He knelt by Lily's high chair and offered her a spoonful. She ate it happily, smacking her lips. It was the same recipe, the one that had started it all. He looked up at Serafina, his eyes full of love and gratitude. "Still my best dish," he said quietly. "It's my favorite," she replied, her voice thick with happy tears. They were no longer defined by their grief, but by the beautiful new life they had built together, a life founded on a simple, selfless act of kindness in a storm. They had their happily ever after. This story is a testament to the quiet, unassuming power of a single act of kindness. It reminds us that we never truly know the silent battles others are fighting, the heavy burdens they carry behind a brave face. Leo's simple offering of food was more than just sustenance. It was a gesture of empathy that rippled outwards, transforming not only his own life and Serafina's but creating a new, loving family from the ashes of grief. It teaches us that compassion is the most valuable currency we possess, and that giving it freely, without expectation of reward, can unlock miracles we never thought possible. In a world that often feels cold and transactional, a moment of pure, selfless connection can be the spark that reignites a frozen heart and illuminates the path to a brighter future. If the story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the goodness that still exists in the world, please take a moment to reflect on its message. Think about the Leos in your own life, the quiet, dignified people who give so much and ask for so little. And think about how a small gesture of support, a moment of recognition, could change the course of their day or even their life. Our world is healed not by grand, sweeping gestures, but by the accumulation of small, tender acts of grace between strangers. We invite you to join our community of viewers who believe in the power of love and compassion. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need a little hope today, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring stories that will warm your heart and inspire your spirit. We'll see you in the next one.